Welcome to Past People. To support our channel, please subscribe. The life of Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale. He was known as Eddie within his family and was the eldest child of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Despite being second in line to the British throne from birth, he never became King or Prince of Wales due to his untimely death. Eddie had a diverse early life, travelling the world as a Royal Navy cadet and later joining the British Army, though he didn't actively serve. He had two unsuccessful courtships before becoming engaged to Princess Victoria, Mary of Teck in late 1891, only to tragically succumb to illness during a major pandemic shortly thereafter. His life has been shrouded in mystery, with speculations about his intellect, sexuality, and mental health. Some unfounded rumours linked him to scandals like the Cleveland Street affair, and even suggested that he might be Jack the Ripper. However, many records disprove these claims. Born prematurely in 1864, Albert Victor was the first child of Prince of Wales and his wife, named after his grandparents, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Despite his formal title, he was affectionately called Eddie by his family. Albert Victor's early education was alongside his younger brother, Prince George, under the tutelage of John Neil Dalton, starting in 1871. Dalton's rigorous program covered academics, physical activities, and military drills, but Albert Victor's intellectual progress was deemed slow, attributed to an uninspiring teaching. Despite learning Danish and overcoming language barriers, his academic performance remained sluggish. Speculations about the impact of his mother's deafness or physical factors were considered. In 1877, both brothers joined HMS Britannia for naval training, but Albert Victor fell behind due to illness. In 1879, they began a 3-year naval cadet tour on HMS Bacchante, travelling extensively across the British Empire, including stops in the America, the Falkland Islands, and more, even receiving tattoos in Japan. Afterwards, in 1883, Albert Victor and Prince George pursued separate paths. Albert Victor attended Trinity College, Cambridge, where his academic interests waned. He engaged in a social life and made connections with notable figures, but it's unclear if he had any sexual experiences during this time. In 1885, he joined the 10th Hussars, serving in various roles, and despite disliking drilling activities, he enjoyed polo. His academic challenges didn't hinder his promotions, and eventually he became a captain. During this period, his private life was uneventful, despite fellow officers' efforts to introduce him to the world, which he resisted. The Cleveland Scandal. In July 1889, a male brothel in Cleveland Street, London, was uncovered by the Met Police, revealing clients' names, including Lord Arthur Somerset, an ex-equerry to the Prince of Wales. And at the time, all homosexual acts between men were illegal, carrying potential consequences like social exile and up to 2 years hard labour in prison. The scandal implicated high-ranking individuals, sparking rumours that Prince Albert Victor was involved. Though the prostitutes didn't directly implicate him, it's believed Somerset's solicitor, Arthur Newton, may have spread these rumours to divert attention. Reports emerged in December 1889 that the Prince and Princess of Wales received anonymous letters related to the scandal. The Prince of Wales intervened and no clients were prosecuted. Concrete evidence against Albert Victor never emerged. Some speculate about his involvement, but historians found no evidence supporting claims of homosexuality or bisexuality. While English newspapers avoided linking the prince directly to the scandal, international press coverage, particularly in Welsh, colonial and American newspapers, was less restrained. Lord Waterford, Somerset's sister, and Somerset himself denied Albert Victor's involvement, but rumours still persisted. But no one involved in the original case was convicted of perjury or struck off during the Cleveland Street scandal. His Indian tour. In October 1889, Albert Victor embarked on a 7-month tour of British India. a pre-planned journey unrelated to the London scandal rumours. He visited various destinations like Athens, Port Said, Cairo and Aden, arriving in Bombay on the 9th of November 1889. His trip included generous hospitality from many parts of the world. He mostly used trains for travel, occasionally riding ceremonial elephants and engaging in sport hunting. During the trip, he met Mrs. Margery Haddon, who later claimed he was the father of her son, Clarence Haddon. However, her allegations lacked evidence and were dismissed. In the 1920s, Clarence revived the story, but was discredited during his 1934 extortion trial, when documents showed his birth date predated Albert Victor's encounter with Mrs. Haddon by at least 2 years. Albert Victor was granted the titles Duke of Clarence and Avondale and Earl of Athlone of Queen Victoria's 71st birthday, May 24, 1890, but these honours didn't affect the royal line of succession, even if Clarence Haddon's claims were true. Potential brides. In 1889, Queen Victoria, Albert Victor's grandmother, hoped that he would marry his paternal cousin, Princess Alix of Hessen-by-Rhine, who was among her beloved grandchildren. While at Balmoral Castle, he proposed to Alix, but she didn't share his affections and declined his engagement offer. Albert Victor persisted in his efforts to persuade Alix, but eventually gave up in 1890 when she wrote him a letter expressing her inability to marry him, citing her affection for him as a cousin. After the unsuccessful proposal to Alix, Queen Victoria suggested that Albert Victor consider marrying another first cousin, Princess Margaret of Prussia. She conveyed her thoughts on Margaret's suitability for the role of queen in a formal letter to him. However, Albert Victor's mother strongly objected to the idea, and it was ultimately abandoned. During this period, Albert Victor fell in love with Princess Helene of Orleans, but her Roman Catholic faith posed an initial obstacle. Despite Queen Victoria's initial opposition, she eventually supported their marriage plans when they offered concessions. However, Helene's father remained resolute in his refusal, leading to the courtship's end. Albert Victor's affections then turned to Princess Victoria Mary of Teck, the daughter of Queen Victoria's first cousin, Princess Mary Adelaide, Duchess of Teck. Queen Victoria fully supported this match, finding Mary charming, sensible and attractive. On the 3rd of December 1891, Albert Victor proposed to Mary at Luton Hoo, the Danish ambassador's country residence. Their wedding was scheduled for the 27th of February 1892. In 1891, Albert Victor wrote to Lady Sybil, expressing his love, though he didn't reveal the object of his affection. A week later, he inquired if she had any affection for him, hoping for even a small measure of love. In late 1891, he was linked to Lydia Miller, a former Gaiety Theatre chorus girl, who tragically took her life with carbolic acid. It was suggested that Albert Victor, using Lord Charles Montagu as a front, had urged her to quit the stage. The scandal, akin to the Cleveland Street affair, received overseas press coverage. British regional newspapers quoted the Star, confirming the connection between Albert Victor and Lydia. Rumours later emerged in 1900 posthumously regarding his involvement with another former Gaiety girl, Maud Richardson, with allegations of attempted royal family payoffs. Letters were found later on from Albert Victor mentioning a £200 payment towards the family. Around mid-1890, Albert Victor was treated by multiple doctors, referred to as having fever or gout in correspondence. Some speculate he may have had a mild venereal disease like gonorrhea, potentially recurring from an earlier episode, though the exact ailment remains uncertain. In 1892, at the age of 28, Albert Victor fell ill during a pandemic and died from pneumonia. His death deeply affected his family, particularly his mother, Princess Alexandra, his younger brother, Prince George, who later married Princess Mary of Teck, his fiancée, and became King George V in 1910. Albert Victor's tomb, designed by Alfred Gilbert, is a remarkable sculpture in the Albert Memorial Chapel near St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. His legacy remains marked by fascination and intrigue, as his life continues to be a subject of historical interest and debate. Royal facts about George V. The Victorian family of Queen Victoria was full of scandal and drama, and as the son of Edward VII, George was not void of this family drama himself. George was put forward into the front and centre of this drama, as well as having a tragic relationship with his controversial elder son, and that meant that George barely had a moment of peace in his life. George was born into his role of the spare heir on the 3rd of June 1865. His place of birth was Marlborough House, right in the heart of London. His mother was Princess Alexandra of Denmark, and his father was Albert Edward, the future King Edward VII. He was part of a large brood of children of 6, and despite his father being away on various rendezvous with many mistresses and women of the night, he lived in a privileged, large and luxurious mansion with his prince and princess siblings, and his parents were far from ordinary, and their arranged marriage was far from a fairy tale. George was the grandson of one of the most powerful people in the world, Queen Victoria. His grandmother's relationship with his father was strained, and she did not trust him with the royal duties 1 ounce. This meant that Edward had a lot of time on his hands and had to occupy himself somehow, and his hobbies were very controversial. Not only was he a disappointment to her, but she also blamed him for the untimely death of her husband, meaning she could barely even look at him. She took away all of his royal responsibilities and refused to allow him any involvement in the royal court at all. Although his father was able to have 6 children with his wife, for the majority of their marriage he was away, getting his end away. Despite his father's controversial behaviour and adultery towards his mother, George grew up in awe of his father, and he was mostly liked by the general public. Perhaps he was in awe of his father because he was blissfully unaware of his parents' double life. The childhood George was aware of was that of a happy royal family, but it would only become clearer as he grew older that his father was often absent for long periods of time. It is likely that he believed that his father was on official royal duties, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Prince Albert Edward eventually succeeded his mother and became King Edward VII, but before that he had another name, Dirty Bertie. His father was becoming a womanizer, and his wife had to accept that he would never be monogamous. She knew that he was sleeping around with mistresses, but she had to ignore it if she wished to be his queen consort and wife. It is believed that he had at least 55 mistresses, and those are just the ones that are known about. It was due to this behaviour that got him the nickname Dirty Bertie, which is not the best name to be associated with the future King of England. Bertie was unfazed by the nickname, and he continued to womanize his way through society with his 55 mistresses, as well as the prostitutes that he saw in the Parisian brothels. Yet for all his debauchery, Edward was remarkably discreet, and more often than not, the society gossip could only guess at who was sharing the prince's bed on a given night. Prince George was not originally destined to be the King of the UK, but tragically the death of his eldest brother, Prince Albert Victor, meant the crown fell at his feet. George was a second-born son, and there was only a year between the boys. They were educated alongside each other, with neither one gaining the title of a star student. Their father was also a young boy who did not get on with the royal education system, and so when it was evident that his sons were not interested either, he shipped them away from home in a bid to make real men of them. The Prince of Wales believed that the best way to become a royal man was to join the Royal Navy, and George's father sent both him and his brother off for training when he was just 12 years old, and 3 years later, at the age of 15, the pair of them entered service on HMS Bacchante. His life on the ship did not involve active combat and instead could resemble a holiday, travelling the world, than a strict boot camp for boys. Aboard the ship, George and his brother travelled the world together. They were privileged to visit the furthest reaches of the British Empire, from the Caribbean to South Africa to Australia. In 1881, they visited Japan, where the teenage George made a scandalous decision to get a tattoo of a blue and red dragon on his arm. George and his brother had endured many interesting events together, but as Albert Victor was to be king, his life was to take a different turn to George's. His brother was enrolled to Trinity College to study while he remained in the Navy. He was now a lonesome man without his brother as his sidekick, but a new love would enter his life instead when he met the woman of his dreams. George began serving with his uncle Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, in Malta. He was the best placed to show him the reins of being the spare heir to the throne, as his uncle was also the second-born son. During this trip, his uncle had brought his daughter, Princess Marie of Edinburgh, with him, and Marie was George's first cousin, but this didn't stop him from falling in love with her. Strangely enough, the love match was approved by the royal family, with his grandmother, father and uncle all approving. For the royal family, it seems like a match made in heaven. At least, it did for most of them. Others weren't so happy about it, and that's when the scheming began. Join me in part 2 to delve into how George's love life took an even stranger turn, from falling in love with his first cousin to marrying his dead brother's fiancée. The cousins were getting on brilliantly, but not everybody was a fan of the love match, and some even despised the idea. George's mother and her sister were some of the people against the love match between the first cousins, not that it was because of this. They were just worried about the political problems the match would cause, and marriages were often a way to improve friendships between countries and political parties. It was George's aunt that put an end to the love match. She managed to persuade Princess Marie to turn down George's hand of marriage. She would not become the Queen of the United Kingdom, but she did go on to become the Queen of Romania. George was devastated, but his life was only going to take a further turn for the worst when he fell poorly. George had contracted typhoid. This was a scary concept for the prince's family, as it was rumoured to be the same disease that stole the life of his grandfather, Prince Albert. He was completely out of action for 6 weeks, while he recovered from the illness. He spent the time lying in bed and just praying for it to be all over with. Finally, his fever broke and the family were overjoyed. When George and his brother Albert Victor were separated, it did not take long for Albert Victor to spiral downwards. Albert Victor was gaining a reputation that no one in England wanted at the time. There were rumours spiralling of all varieties, including scandalous affairs with chorus girls, as well as controversial antics at a gay brothel. Albert Victor would become engaged to Mary of Teck, but due to tragedy, the pair would never go on to marry. Instead, there was a twist on the horizon. The pair were blissfully engaged for 6 wonderful weeks before the influenza pandemic hit and ravaged the royal court. The disease took over the body of Prince Albert Victor, who later died at the tragically young age of 28 on the 14th of January 1892. Albert was George's lifelong friend as well as his brother, and he had been tragically taken too soon. Not only had he died, but so had his prospects as future king. This meant that the role fell into the hands of George, and George was unprepared for this role and did not expect to take over the crown at all. Queen Victoria had spent a long time finding a bride suitable for a future reigning monarch, with Princess Mary of Teck, and she was not about to let this bride out of her grips. Queen Victoria therefore wished for Mary of Teck to marry George instead, and this was a strange twist of events, as she was previously married to his dead brother. Surprisingly, this match worked out very well for the pair. George and Mary must have struggled at first with the notion of marrying each other, when the pair envisioned completely different roles in their relationship. However, over the coming months, the pair would grow to like one another, and they shared a deep grief for Albert Victor. 1 year after losing Albert, George asked Mary's hand, and she said yes. George and Mary of Teck had a dedicated and loving relationship. Their relationship in private was an affectionate one, but in public they appeared cold and distant due to George struggling with public affection. Their love was evident in the loving letters that they sent each other over the years, and pretty soon they would both need all the help that they could get. George and Mary would go on to have a large family together, producing many heirs to the throne. They had 6 children, 5 of which were sons, and 1 was a daughter. George allegedly gave a simple explanation of his fatherhood style. My father was frightened as his mother, and I was frightened of my father, and I am darn well going to see it that my children are frightened of me. That would certainly line up with what his son Henry would later say about him, calling George a terrible father. Maybe the kids resented the fact that George didn't give them the life that most royal families expected. George was entitled to live in the most lavish of palaces and castles in the UK, but instead he opted for a more humble small family home at York Cottage, a relatively small house in Norfolk. Despite being the next in line for the throne as the King of the UK, his appearance on the outside would make you believe that he was just an upper middle class family rather than the next king. Perhaps he loved this home so much because it allowed him to take part in his hobbies in the countryside. Queen Victoria was still alive, and so the crown was still very far away from George at this point. He was another man with a future reign, with a lot of time on his hands, and like Edward, he had some controversial hobbies. He was into shooting, and shooting animals too. He had plenty of time to kill, and he took that literally. As his official biographer put it, when he was the Duke of York, he did nothing at all but kill animals and stick in stamps. George's 2 great loves were hunting and stamp collecting, though one of those pastimes got a little bloodier than the other. When George became the Emperor of India, George and his wife took a trip through the Indian subcontinent, giving him access to many big game kills. During his 10-day trip, he shot 21 tigers, 8 rhinos, and a bear. He may have been rich, but you did not want to mess with George while he had a gun in his hand. George was becoming obsessed with his bloody hobby of killing animals, and one day he perhaps took it too far when he went hunting for a 6-hour stint on the 18th of December 1913. In that time, he shot 1,000 pheasants. That's one bird every 20 seconds. And once he was finished, even George admitted that perhaps he had gone overboard. "We went a little too far," he remarked. Join me in part 3 to delve into his life as king, as well as his German enemies, his involvement in World War I, and his betrayal of his family, which ended in their untimely, tragic assassination. When Queen Victoria passed away, his father was catapulted into power. The long-awaited role of king was his, and when he became King Edward VII, this made George the new Prince of Wales, and he would learn as much as he could over the years on how to become king from his father. The rest of his time was spent making and raising a family, as well as travelling the world. It is a good job that he was able to be educated on his future role as king, as his father was not on the throne for long, and his father's controversial habits had finally caught up on him. The years of eating, drinking, and sleeping were no more. Queen Victoria reigned over Britain for 63 years, but his father would only be king for a fraction of the time, with 9 years. He succumbed to illness on the 6th of May 1910, and George was devastated. He wrote, "I have lost my best friend, and the best of fathers. I am heartbroken and overwhelmed with grief." The death of his father did not take front and centre of his mind for long, as he had other things to worry about with the ongoings of World War I. On the 4th of August 1914, 4 years after George became king, he wrote a frank entry in his diary. "I held a council at 10:45 to declare war with Germany. It is a terrible catastrophe, but it is not our fault. Please to God it may be soon over." World War I was the most horrifying conflict the world had ever seen, and the politics of it were very close to home, with his own family members serving as enemies. Kaiser Wilhelm II was the figurehead of Germany at the time, and George and Britain blamed him wholeheartedly for the destruction on the world. Wilhelm was in fact George's first cousin. This was a war of families as well as continents. Strangely enough, George's ancestry was German. He came from the house of Saxe-Coburg in Gotha. It was difficult, therefore, for him to portray himself with proud national British status. Britons watched as thousands upon thousands of their fathers, sons and brothers went off to fight Germans, while a German ruled them. It did not go unnoticed by the public, and George knew that he had to do something drastic to change the narrative. He changed his family name from the House of Saxe-Coburg in Gotha to the House of Windsor by official royal proclamation. He convinced his other German relatives to take up the name too, with Prince Louis of Battenberg changing his name to Louis Mountbatten. The name lives on today, with the current monarchy serving under the House of Windsor, but George could not reform all ills with this statement. During a stressful period for George, his other first cousin was coming into trouble in Russia when Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown by a dangerous and murderous family, the Bolsheviks, who had taken over the country. The government were quick to offer their support and help in the form of asylum for the family, but oddly, George heartlessly turned them away with devastating and fatal consequences. This was the ultimate betrayal to his own family. Rather than fuel a revolution in his own country, which is what George believed the Romanov family would do, he tragically turned them away. His cousin and his family were left alone to be murdered in cold blood, after several grueling months in captivity. Their bodies were dumped down an abandoned mineshaft. In 1918, the war ended, and King George, alongside his people, rejoiced with happiness for the first time in a long time. However, there would be tragedy on the horizon for George. Prince John, George's youngest child, was born in 1905, but from the moment of his birth, he was a sickly and frail boy. Little Johnny was the baby of the family, but no matter how much anyone spoiled him, his health just never improved. Finally, just 2 months after Armistice Day, George's worst fear came true when he suffered a seizure on the 18th of January 1919 that he would never recover from. Tragically, at only the young age of 13, he passed away in his sleep. George and his wife, Mary, were both devastated, but part of them was relieved. John's entire life had been filled with sickness and pain, and in a letter George painfully described John's passing as the greatest mercy possible. It was George that started the Christmas tradition that we so eagerly await today from the current monarchy. In 1932, he sat down to address the nation for the first ever radio announcement from the monarchy on Christmas Day. This was not something he was overly enthralled to do, but his advisors reminded him that his people wanted to hear from him. And off the back of his announcement, the people felt connected to him, and he won the hearts of the nation, making him a beloved king, even if he didn't see it. In 1935, George celebrated his Silver Jubilee. Thousands of people joined the streets to celebrate the occasions with him. His radio address had allowed him to reach his people, unlike any monarch who became before him. When he heard the crown's adulation, he exclaimed, "I cannot understand it. After all, I am only a very ordinary sort of fellow." George was part of a large brood of siblings, and his older brother was the problem child, and this pattern repeated itself in his own children. George's relationship with his eldest son Edward grew more and more strained as the years went on, despite being close when he was younger. Now, oftentimes fathers expect too much of their sons, but in this case, George was 100% right. Prince Edward was not the kind of guy to make a father proud. Join me in part 4 to delve into how his son took his adulterous and promiscuous behaviour of his father, as well as being involved in the scandals of all royal scandals. I will also look at how King George, his own doctor, euthanized him. George's son, Edward VIII, had a lot in common with his controversial grandfather rather than his upstanding father. He embarked on many affairs with married women, courtesans, and whoever else happened to catch his eye. Edward's antics disappointed George and the other royals, but they were glad that his drama was out of the public eye. However, this would not remain the case forever, and eventually he got himself involved with a scandalous woman who murdered her husband and threatened to bring down the monarchy. Edward VIII became entangled with Marguerite Alibert, and she was not the kind of person that George wanted his son sleeping around with. Marguerite Alibert was a French high-class prostitute who became the first lover of Edward, the Prince of Wales and heir to the British throne. She would later be at the centre of the biggest scandal of the times, and she was very nearly damaged the reputation of the future king and the monarchy. A series of events began to stop the scandal from getting out of control, and that is the interesting story of Marguerite Alibert, the prostitute turned princess turned murderer. Edward VIII is famously known for giving up the throne in 1937 in order to be with the love of his life, Wallis Simpson, who he was not permitted to be with because she was a divorcee twice before. This scandal was prevalent throughout Europe, but 20 years before, another scandal was taking shape. The affair was kept under wraps by the prince, and he only declared his feelings for his mistress on paper, but she kept them all. George used all of his power to ensure that his son's name never appeared in the press surrounding Marguerite Alibert. And although he almost succeeded, with just the odd rumours whirling, the public never learned that the Prince of Wales had an affair with a working girl who then shot her new lover. George eventually tracked down every last letter that Edward had written to Alibert and had them destroyed. But the damage was done, and George would never truly trust his son again. His eldest son caused him a lot of stress, but he did have another son who he adored and respected. This man would go on to become the future king when his scandalous brother put his love with a divorced woman above his duty to the throne. He was also very fond of his granddaughter, Lilibet, known by the public as Queen Elizabeth II. She loved him in turn, affectionately calling him Grandpa England. He thought both of them would make excellent monarchs, if only they got the chance. Maybe George had a sixth sense for what would transpire, or maybe his disappointment in his son had created a self-fulfilling prophecy, but by 1935, George's faith in his son and heir had all but evaporated. He is reported to have said, "After I am dead, the boy will ruin himself within 12 months. I pray to God my eldest son will never marry and have children, and that nothing will come between Bertie and Lilibet and the throne." George had always been the epitome of health, especially as a young, strapping lad as a sailor. But the years as king took its toll on him, and he had been involved in a few accidents that caused him poor health. The once hale and hearty king grew frail and sickly, and a painful tragedy only made things worse when he lost his favourite sister. During World War I, his horse buckled and threw him to the ground, causing serious injury from which he never fully recovered, alongside smoking many a cigarette throughout his entire life, and those took a toll on his health. George had been extremely close to his eldest and late brother Albert Victor, but he had also another sibling of which he adored, and she was his little sister Victoria. In December of 1935, when George was at death's door, Victoria suffered a hemorrhage and suddenly passed away. Her loss sent the king into a spiralling depression from which he would never recover. By January 1936, only a month after the death of his sister, George was still clinging on to life, but only just. He was now staying at the country estate of Sandringham House, and he was getting more and more frail, which restricted him to just his bedroom. Finally, his doctors released a statement. The king's life is moving peacefully towards its close, and that it did. George passed quietly in his sleep on the 20th of January 1936, or so it seemed, but there was more to the story that was shocking. Lord Dawson of Penn was George's chief physician in his final days. He kept a diary from his time with the king, and it made for an interesting read. He kept them a closely guarded secret for the rest of his life. In 1986, his diaries were made public, and they revealed the king's last words, a mumbled, "God damn you," to his nurse. This was not the only thing his diaries talked about. Lord Dawson, a highly regarded doctor, had lied about that fateful night, as it would actually appear that his own doctor euthanized him. The entire world thought that George had passed from natural causes because that is what they were told, and no one would have questioned that something much more shocking had happened. However, Dawson was an avid believer in euthanasia, and so he took it upon himself to end the king's life, in a bid to give him a kinder, less slow and painful end. Dawson knew that George's end might take hours or even days, and he saw the toll that it was taking on the king's family. So he made the decision to kill the king. He injected him with morphine and cocaine. 15 minutes later, George's breath slowed, then stopped. Upon his passing, George's son Edward became King Edward VIII, but not only did George not see a leader or a king in his son also didn't fancy it either. George thought he'd make a terrible king, but apparently so did Edward. Before the year was out, Edward abdicated his throne so that he could marry his divorcee partner, Wallis Simpson. He was then free to live a life of high fashion, German sympathies, and extreme prejudice, while his younger brother became King George VI. So King George got what he wanted in the end, when his second son and then granddaughter would reign over Britain. Please continue to support my channel by subscribing. Let's delve deeper into the life and legacy of Prince Alexander John of Wales, a child born into privilege but marked by the cruel hand of fate. Prince Alexander John of Wales, the sixth child and youngest son of Prince Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, and Princess Alexandra, Princess of Wales, came into the world on a crisp April day in 1871. His birthplace was none other than the splendid Sandringham House, a residence synonymous with British royal grandeur. Regrettably, Alexander John's entrance into this world was marred by adversity from the very beginning. Born prematurely, his fragile constitution rendered him a sickly infant, and heartbreakingly, he would spend only 24 fleeting hours in the embrace of life. Despite the nature of his existence, he was christened with a name that bore echoes of majesty and heritage, Alexander John Charles Albert. However, within the intimate circles of his family, he was affectionately known as John, a name that would come to symbolize both his brief presence and the tender affection bestowed upon him during his tragically short life. When the inevitable came to pass and young John's fragile flame was extinguished, his final resting place became a poignant reminder of the fleeting nature of existence. He was laid to rest below the venerable walls of Sandringham Church, known as the Church of St. Mary's Magdalene, located amidst the serene and picturesque landscapes of Norfolk. Here, in the tranquil shadows of this sacred edifice, his memory would endure. Yet the tragic destiny of the name John did not end with Prince Alexander John. In the annals of the British royal family, this name had acquired an aura of ill omen. This superstition was tragically reinforced when Prince John, the youngest son of King George V, was interred beside his ill-fated uncle, Prince Alexander John of Wales, within the consecrated grounds of Sandringham. The bonds of family, it seemed, could not escape the dark spectre of fate. History repeated itself once more when John Spencer, the brother of the beloved Princess Diana, was born into the world on a bitter winter's day, the 12th of January 1960. Tragically, like his ill-fated predecessors, he too faced an untimely and sorrowful demise, a mere 10 hours after his birth. In a poignant symmetry with the past, John Spencer too found his eternal rest among the solemn and sacred precedents of Sandringham, forging yet another link to the chain of melancholy that bound these souls across generations. Thus, the tale of Prince Alexander John of Wales serves as a poignant reminder of the roles of fate, the weight of a name, and the enduring bonds that tie generations of a royal family, not just in life, but in the shared sorrow of untimely departures and unfulfilled destinies. The life and legacy of Princess Louise, Duchess of Fife. The difficult birth of Princess Louise. Princess Louise, the third child and eldest daughter of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, was born on the 20th of February 1867. Though her upbringing was privileged, her birth was not without difficulty. During her pregnancy, Queen Alexandra developed rheumatic fever and was unable to use chloroform during her labour. This made for a painful delivery of Princess Louise, and despite the difficult birth, Louise was a healthy baby, and as she grew, she showed a shy and low-key personality. Louise grew up with 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and they were all raised in a loving and supportive environment. Their father, King Edward VII, was a hands-on parent who took an active role in their upbringing, and their mother, Queen Alexandra, was affectionate and nurturing. Louise's childhood was filled with royal duties and activities. She attended public events with her family and participated in court ceremonies, but she also enjoyed more personal pursuits such as riding horses and playing the piano. Growing up as a member of the British royal family, Princess Louise was born on the 20th of February 1867 at the Marlborough House in London. As the third child and the eldest daughter of Edward VII and Alexandra, she received the title of Princess Royal, which is given to the monarch's eldest daughter. Despite being a member of the royal family, Princess Louise had a relatively normal childhood. She grew up with her brothers, Albert Victor, George, and her 2 sisters, Maud and Victoria. The siblings were close and enjoyed playing games and taking part in outdoor activities together. Louise's education was not conventional for a royal princess. She was taught by private tutors and attended local schools, where she learned a range of subjects including history, literature, and languages. Her education was augmented by trips to museums, art galleries, and other cultural events. As a member of the British royal family, Princess Louise was also introduced to a range of official duties and events from a young age. These included attending state banquets, visiting hospitals and charitable organisations, and taking part in ceremonial events such as Trooping the Colour and the opening of Parliament. Despite her royal obligations, Princess Louise was known for being shy and reserved. She preferred to stay out of the spotlight and avoided large social gatherings wherever possible. Her quiet and unassuming nature meant that she was often overlooked by the press and the public in favour of her more outgoing siblings. Despite her reserved demeanour, Princess Louise was very close to her parents, particularly her father, Edward VII. She described him as the best of fathers and often confided in him about her concerns and aspirations. Growing up as a member of the British royal family was both a privilege and a challenge for Louise. While she was exposed to a range of unique experiences and opportunities, she also had to navigate the pressures and expectations that came with her position in society. Despite these challenges, however, Princess Louise remained committed to serving her country and her family throughout her life. As she entered her teenage years, Louise's mother became increasingly concerned about the prospect of her daughters marrying. She was determined that they should not make mistakes in their choice of partners, and so she was hesitant to encourage any courtships. Louise did eventually find love when she met Alexandra Duff, 6th Earl Fife. Louise and Alexander fell in love quickly and were married in July 1889. The couple settled in Scotland, where Alexandra had inherited a large estate. Louise and Alexander were well suited to each other, sharing a love of hunting, shooting, and the Scottish countryside. While he was often busy with his duties as a Member of Parliament, and she had to attend to her royal duties, they still spent a lot of time together outdoors, enjoying each other's company. The family's main residence in Scotland was Mar Lodge, a hunting lodge in Braemar. It became a hub for the Fife family and the place where they would welcome their royal relatives and elite guests. They had 3 children together: Princess Alexandra Victoria Alberta Edwina Louise, born on the 17th of May 1891, who later became the 2nd Duchess of Fife; Princess Maud Alexandra Victoria Georgina Bertha, born on the 3rd of April 1893, who later became Countess of Southesk; and Alistair Windsor, born on the 9th of January 1914 and did not hold any title, as he was tragically born stillborn. Louise was a devoted mother and took a keen interest in her children's education and upbringing. In 1900, it became apparent that Louise and Alexander were unlikely to have any more children. This posed a problem, as Alexander was the heir to his father's dukedom, but he had no male children to inherit it. To remedy this, Queen Victoria created a second Duke of Fife, with a special remainder in the event of no male heir. This ensured that the Fife dukedom would continue even if Alexander died without a son. Tragically, Alexander did die young, at the age of 62, leaving Louise a widow. In December of 1911, while sailing aboard the SS Delhi to Egypt, the Princess Royal and her family were shipwrecked off the coast of Morocco. Although they were otherwise unharmed, the Duke of Fife fell ill with pleurisy, probably contracted as a result of the shipwreck. He died in Egypt in January 1912, and Princess Alexandra succeeded to his dukedom, becoming Duchess of Fife in her own right. Louise's later years and legacy. In her later years, Princess Louise, Duchess of Fife, was known for leading a rather reclusive life, and after the death of her husband, Alexander Duff, Louise retreated to her estate in Scotland and devoted her time to her family. Louise remained an active member of the royal family and continued to attend important events and ceremonies with her mother and sister. In the years leading up to her death, Louise suffered from heart disease, and in the October of 1929 at Mar Lodge, she was taken ill with gastric hemorrhage and she was brought back to London. It was here that Louise died in her sleep 15 months later, on the afternoon of the 4th of January 1931, a month before her 64th birthday, at her home at Portman Square in London, with both of her two daughters, Alexandra and Maud, at her side. Her funeral was attended by members of the royal family. In many ways, Princess Louisa's later years were a reflection of her life as a whole. Despite her reserved demeanour, she remained committed to her family until the very end. And though she may not be as well remembered as other members of the royal family, her legacy continues to inspire and influence those who follow in her footsteps. Princess Victoria, her life, family and legacy. Early life and family of Princess Victoria. Princess Victoria was born in 1868 to King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra of Denmark. She was the fourth child and second daughter of the couple. The princess grew up in a wealthy and privileged environment, surrounded by her parents and siblings. Her father, Edward VII, loved his children and was known for being a caring and supportive parent. Victoria grew up in a large and loving family, enjoying a close relationship with all of her siblings. During her childhood, Victoria was an active and curious child. She loved to explore the outdoors and was interested in photography. As Victoria grew older, she had several suitors who expressed an interest in marriage. However, her mother did not encourage any of her daughters to marry and discouraged Victoria from marrying anyone. Despite this, Victoria continued to have several potential suitors throughout her life. Victoria was also a talented photographer. She was interested in capturing moments of her family and compiled several albums of family photographs. She also had a deep love for animals and even tamed a pigeon, which she would take on with her on her walks. Victoria's relationship with her brother George, who would later become king, was particularly close. The two siblings shared a strong bond and spoke on the phone every day. George was known to be protective of his younger sister and would often intervene in her personal life. Overall, the princess had a happy childhood, surrounded by the love and support of her family. Although her mother discouraged her from marriage, Victoria did have several suitors, and her close relationship with her siblings, particularly her brother George, continued throughout her adult life. After her mother's death in 1925, Victoria was finally able to purchase a home in Buckinghamshire and became an active member of the village of Iver. However, she also suffered from several health issues, including neuralgia, migraines, indigestion, and depression in her final years. Princess Victoria passed away in 1935, leaving a legacy of a loving and close-knit family. Victoria's relationship with her brother and parents. Princess Victoria was known within her family as Toria, and she shared a close relationship with her elder brother, King George V. The siblings relied on each other for emotional support, and they often socialised together as well. Victoria and George reportedly spoke on the phone every day, and their conversations were said to be filled with laughter and gossip about other family members. Despite their closeness, there were some tensions between the siblings, mostly related to Victoria's desire to marry. George was protective of his sister and felt that nobody was good enough for her. He reportedly disapproved of all of her suitors, including Prince Adolphus of Teck and Archibald Primrose, the 5th Earl of Rosebery. Victoria had strong feelings for Rosebery and was devastated when he married someone else. Victoria's parents, King Edward VII, Queen Alexandra, were also important figures in her life. She accompanied them on many official engagements, taking on ceremonial roles and representing the family in public events. Victoria's mother was known to be possessive with her children, so much so that she encouraged them from marrying or pursuing romantic relationships. Victoria was not immune to her mother's controlling behaviour, and for years she shared a room with her. Despite this, Victoria remained devoted to her parents and their relationship, and it remained strong throughout their lives. After her mother's death, Victoria was finally able to buy a home, and she became an active member of her local community. She maintained close relationships with her siblings and frequently visited them, but her parents remained her main source of emotional support. After her mother's death, Victoria's life in Iver. After the death of her mother in 1925, Princess Victoria finally gained some independence and was able to establish a home for herself in Iver. The property was called Coppins and it lay on the outskirts of the village. The princess became an active member of the village life and relished her newfound freedom. Victoria spent her days tending to her garden, painting and taking walks in the countryside. She was known for her love of nature and spent hours exploring the flora and fauna of the area. Her beloved pigeon was a constant companion on these walks and became a popular sight with the locals. The princess was very involved in the Iver community and took on several philanthropic projects. She set up a fund to provide for local children who could not afford basic schooling and was a patron of the Iver Horticultural Society. Victoria's passion for gardening was well known, and she often hosted garden parties at Coppins, inviting both locals and notable figures from aristocracy. Despite her active social life, Victoria's health began to decline in her later years. She suffered from neuralgia, migraines, indigestion, and depression. The princess was advised by her doctors to seek rest and recovery in a warmer climate, and she frequently took trips to the French Riviera. In 1935, Victoria passed away at the age of 66. Her legacy as a philanthropist and nature lover remains to this day. And after her death, the estate of Coppins was sold, but Victoria's memory is still preserved. A memorial seat was erected in her honour in the local churchyard in Iver, and a blue plaque was placed on the wall of her former home. Princess Victoria's life in Iver was a testament to her resilience and determination. She found solace in nature and was committed to giving back to her community. And despite her own health struggles, her legacy as a kind and generous princess will be remembered for generations to come. Victoria's health issues and legacy. Princess Victoria's life was not without its challenges. In addition to her strained relationship with her mother, she also struggled with various health issues throughout her life. Victoria's health problems began in her childhood when she was diagnosed with bronchitis and pneumonia. These respiratory issues persisted throughout her life and were a constant source of concern for her family. As she grew older, she developed other health problems, including neuralgia, migraines and indigestion. The constant pain and discomfort caused by these conditions made it difficult for her to perform even the simplest of tasks. Victoria also suffered from depression, which further exacerbated her other health issues. Despite her challenges, Victoria remained active and engaged with the world around her. She continued to partake in her passions for photography and animal taming. Victoria also remained a devoted member of her village community, attending local events and contributing to various charitable causes. Victoria's legacy can be seen in her dedication to animals and in her role as a catalyst for social change. She was an advocate for animal welfare and often used her royal platform to draw attention to the plight of animals in captivity. Moreover, she was also passionate about various social causes, including women's rights and education. In conclusion, Princess Victoria's life was marked by her struggles with health issues, which proved to be a constant source of discomfort and pain. Nonetheless, despite these challenges, she remained a highly engaged and active member of her community, and she is remembered today for her enduring contributions to animal welfare, social causes, and photography. Maud, the Mod Queen of Norway. A look at the life of Queen Consort Maud of Norway. Early life and childhood. Maud, also known as Princess Maud Louise, was born on the 26th of November 1869 in Marlborough House, London. She was the youngest daughter of Edward VII, who later became King of the United Kingdom, and Alexandra of Denmark, the Queen Consort of King Edward VII. As a child, Maud was known for her cheerful personality and affectionate nature. She was nicknamed Harry by her family and close friends, a nickname that stayed with her throughout her life. Maud was educated at home by private tutors and received a well-rounded education in literature, history and languages. Maud's family had close ties with the Danish royal family, and they often visited each other. It was during one of these visits that Maud met Prince Francis of Teck. She fell in love with him, but unfortunately, Prince Francis did not reciprocate her feelings. However, they remained good friends throughout their lives. In 1890, Maud's cousin, Prince Karl of Denmark, visited England. It was during this visit that Maud met him and they fell in love. Maud's mother, Queen Alexandra, was delighted with the match and encouraged the relationship, but many believed that Maud was an ideal match for Prince Karl, and their personalities complemented each other perfectly. Prince Karl proposed to Maud and she accepted. They had a grand wedding on the 22nd of July, 1896, in the private chapel of Buckingham Palace. Shortly after the wedding, they spent 5 months in England before moving to Denmark. It was a tough transition for Maud, but she adapted to her new life and started to learn Danish. Maud and Karl's marriage was a happy one, and they had one child, Prince Alexander. He was born on the 2nd of July, 1903, in Oslo. Alexander was raised in Norway and learned the language fluently. Maud, on the other hand, never became fluent in Norwegian, and she continued to speak English. Maud was known for her love of fashion and her unique style. She was often referred to as the Mod Queen of Norway because of her fashion choices. She was a great supporter of Norwegian fashion and promoted the industry as much as she could. During World War I, Maud founded the Queen's Relief Committee, which supported wounded soldiers and their families. She also visited the hospitals and personally cared for the soldiers, and her efforts were highly appreciated, and she was widely respected for her contribution. The love life of Maud and her marriage to Prince Karl of Denmark. Maud, the Mod Queen of Norway, had an interesting love life before she became queen. As the youngest daughter of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, she was highly sought after by many eligible bachelors. However, there were only 2 men that caught her heart, Prince Francis of Teck and Prince Karl of Denmark. Maud fell in love with Prince Francis while they were still teenagers. She was infatuated with him and expressed her feelings to him. Unfortunately, Prince Francis did not feel the same way, and he rejected her, and this devastated Maud, but she eventually moved on. Years later, Maud met Prince Karl of Denmark, her first cousin, and they fell in love. Unlike her previous experience, Prince Karl reciprocated her feelings. Their courtship was short-lived as they were married in London on the 22nd of July, 1896. The wedding was a lavish affair, attended by many European royal families, and after the wedding, Maud and Prince Karl continued to live in England for 5 months before they moved to Denmark. They settled in Copenhagen, where Maud gave birth to their son Alexander in 1903. Although they were happily married, Maud never lost her love for England. She would often visit her homeland and keep in touch with her family in the English court. Her son Alexander was raised in Norway and was taught the Norwegian language. But Maud, on the other hand, struggled to learn the language and never became fluent. But despite this, she fulfilled her duties as queen and was highly regarded by the Norwegian people. During the First World War, Maud founded the Queen's Relief Committee and organised fundraising events to support the war effort. She also visited Norwegian soldiers on the front lines and urged them to continue fighting for their country's freedom. Maud's reign as Queen Consort came to an end when her husband passed away in 1957. She continued to live in Norway until her death on the 20th of November 1938 at the age of 68. Maud was buried in Norway, and her legacy as a kind and devoted queen is still remembered today. Maud as Queen Consort of Norway and her contributions. When Maud became Queen Consort of Norway, she had a big task to fulfill: to establish a good relationship with the Norwegian people and help them to adapt to the new monarchy system. As someone who had never lost their love for England and had a limited command over Norwegian, it was quite a challenge for her. However, despite these challenges, Maud became a well-respected figure in Norway and made significant contributions during her time there. One of the most notable contributions that Maud made was the establishment of the Queen's Relief Committee during World War I. The committee was set up to provide aid to Norwegian soldiers who were injured or fighting in the war. This was particularly important given that Norway remained neutral during the war, but still felt its impact. The Queen Relief Committee was such a success that it continued to operate even after the end of the war, and helped provide aid to people who were affected by the Spanish flu pandemic. In addition to her work with the Queen's Relief Committee, Maud also played an important role in promoting the arts in Norway. One of her most significant contributions in this area was the establishment of the Norwegian National Theatre. The theatre was founded in 1899, and Maud was one of the institution's most important and influential patrons. She helped fund the theatre and sponsored many of its productions. Maud also supported numerous charitable causes in Norway, particularly those focused on improving the welfare of women and children. She worked closely with the Norwegian Women's Public Health Association and was one of its most important supporters. The association was founded in 1896 and helped to establish clinics and hospitals that provided high-quality maternal care for women in Norway. Despite her contributions to the country, Maud remained quite isolated from Norwegian society, as she never fully immersed herself in the culture and language. Nevertheless, she played an important role in establishing the monarchy as a respected institution in Norway, and helped to create a positive image of the royal family among the Norwegian people. Legacy of Maud and her impact on Norwegian history. Maud, the Mod Queen of Norway, left a lasting impression on Norwegian history through her contributions to the country's healthcare system and her promotion of women's rights. As the Queen Consort of Norway, Maud displayed a genuine interest in the welfare of her subjects and worked tirelessly to improve their lives. During the war, Maud founded the Queen's Relief Committee, which aimed to provide financial assistance and support to families affected by the war. The committee raised a large sum of money, and it was used to purchase medicine, clothing, and other necessities for war victims. This effort earned her the admiration and gratitude of the Norwegian people. She was also a strong advocate for women's rights, and she was an active member of the Norwegian Women's Public Health Association and supported their campaigns for better healthcare services for women. She promoted the establishment of maternity wards in hospitals and encouraged young girls to take up nursing as a profession. Her love for England was evident throughout her life, but her commitment to her duties as Queen Consort of Norway was unwavering. Maud of Norway may have been one of the younger daughters of King Edward VII, but her legacy as Queen Consort of Norway was one of compassion, style, and dedication. Her impact on Norwegian royalty and society was significant, and her memory is still cherished today. Her contributions to the Queen's Relief, her commitment to social causes, and her influence on the image of Norwegian royal family all helped to shape the course of Norwegian history. Maud truly was the Mod Queen of the North, and her influence will still be felt for generations to come.